Check.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, to all of our delegates. Good morning. Please do settle down and find your seats. The program will begin shortly. To all of our guests, delegates who are still outside, we invite you to please find your seats and settle down. The program will begin shortly. Lolibet. Okay, but morning, everybody, delegates, all of our distinguished guests, a good morning to you. This is day 2 of the Asean Competition Conference. Can we start off with a big round of applause to wake us all up? Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo! You had quite a fellowship night last night, yes? Are you all awake? We got coffee, and this is day 2, and we're just gonna go up to lunch today, okay? So don't worry about it. This is day 2 of the 10th ACC. Again, I am Isa Litton, the honor's all mine, to wake you all up today for the last 2 sessions. But before we get to the last 2, why don't we do a quick recap on yesterday's 3 sessions? And for that, here's a comprehensive synthesis of our day 1 from the Philippine Competition Commission's Commissioner Michael B. Peloton. Good morning.
Good morning, distinguished guests, representatives of ASEAN member states, esteemed panelists, and valued participants. As we welcome a new day at the 10th ASEAN Competition Conference under the compelling theme, From Innovation to Impact, Synergizing Antitrust and IP Regulation for a Stronger ASEAN. I stand before you to reflect on the impactful moments of yesterday and set the stage for the enlightening discussions that await us today. Day 1 of the conference was opened by our very own PCC Chairperson Michael Galicia Aguinaldo, and he succinctly initiated the purpose of the 2-day conference, that is, to gather insights from various stakeholders on how to effectively cultivate a competitive business environment in the ASEAN region. This edition of the ASEAN Competition Conference, or the ACC, aims to deepen discussions on intellectual property regulation, technology transfer agreements, trademarks, licensing practices in various ASEAN markets, and related issues in digital platforms. Given the nuances of industries, understanding the interconnectedness of value chains, and an open discussion of complex issues can help ASEAN find a common ground, explore emerging best practices, and facilitate the adoption of a comprehensive approach in solving problems. Deputy Secretary General for the ASEAN Economic Community Pillar, His Excellency Satvinder Singh, also delivered his opening remarks virtually. Rapid digitalization and other challenges underscore the pivotal role of competition policy to harness dynamics for ASEAN growth. Intellectual property, or IP, is a major contributor to ASEAN's advancement. IP and competition policy and law, or what we call CPL, share common goals: economic growth, fair competition, and innovation. Competition policy and IP regulations are mutually supportive and are critical foundations for creation and innovation. However, with more complex technologies and IP development, it may become increasingly harder to determine market dominance and examine other anti-competitive practices, especially where micro, small, and medium enterprises require more protection. There is the need to identify appropriate frameworks for enforcement of cases with IP issues. IP and CPL need nimble and well-thought-out solutions in deterring anti-competitive behaviors and in helping economies adapt to an environment marked with volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. ASEAN member states will benefit from solid recommendations, openness to collaborative discussions, and developing approaches to synergize competition and IP regulation. In his keynote presentation on balancing IP, innovation, and competition in ASEAN markets, no less than the Philippine Supreme Court Chief Justice, the Honorable Chief Justice Alexander G. Gesmundo, discussed the current legal framework of competition law in the Philippines. Upon the passage of the Philippine Competition Act, or Republic Act number 10667, the Supreme Court issued the rule on administrative search and inspection under the PCA, which authorized commercial courts to issue inspection orders based on certain guidelines. The court also decided on competition cases. As such, the judiciary plays an important role in promoting economic development and in promoting the rights of economic agents by safeguarding markets through its decisions and rules of procedure. Day 1 had 3 plenary sessions. In plenary session 1, entitled Advancing Merger Control and IP Regulation in ASEAN Pharmaceutical Markets, the panelists discussed the role of patents in incentivizing innovation. Although patents may have time-bound constraints on market competition, domestic regulatory frameworks and government policy decisions contribute to the competition landscape for medicines. The pharma sector is opaque and complex. Obtaining industry information is challenging. When investigating a merger and acquisition transaction, defining the relevant market may not be straightforward given the preferences of consumers. In assessing market competition, loss of innovation as a theory of harm is a complex when there is no clear basis for alternative counterfactuals. M&A transactions may lead to fewer innovations, especially when there is an overlap in the R&D activities of 2 merging. Into a future replacement for its core business. In the European Union, it has been observed that an approaching patent expiration encourages firms to enter into M&A transactions. In reviewing M&A transactions, the EU considers not just the overlapping products, but the market pipeline products as well, which will be competing in the future. A 4-layer assessment is practiced: actual competition of product and price, potential competition in product and price, capability and incentives to innovate, and lastly, non-horizontal relationships. So in plenary session 2, entitled Combating Anti-Competitive Practices and Licensing in ASEAN Pharma Markets, it was recognized that the IP system is facing challenges in patenting which have caused delays and hindrances in access and distribution. Evergreening includes actions by a firm to protect an existing product from competition. Pharmaceutical companies commonly have a life cycle team: IP lawyers, regulators, scientists, doctors, pharmacists, that aims to extend the life of a product for as long as possible. Other competition enforcement issues are pay for delay or reverse payment agreement and product hopping. In Vietnam, my friend, competition issues in the pharma sector are less complex. Since foreign firms are prohibited to distribute drugs, domestic players and the government uses this as a leverage when transacting with multinational companies. Firms interested to distribute drugs in Vietnam must cooperate with Vietnamese government. As a result, pharmaceutical production is competitive. Distribution has several market segments. Many chains of private hospitals, professional drug distribution, and state-owned distribution companies increase the growth of pharma industries. Market liberalization and increased consumer awareness on medicines have also contributed to healthy market competition. Did I get it right, my friend from Vietnam? Thank you. In Indonesia, key challenges are substantial capital requirements and technology controlled by global manufacturers, and common issues such as patent evergreening and pay-for-delay agreements. IP is exempt from CPL per Article 50. However, Indonesia's Antitrust Authority is actively engaged in investigating cartel behavior. Moving forward, a strategy is to maintain close collaboration with relevant sector regulators to help improve licensing and regulation. For the Philippines, although Republic Act number 9502, or the Cheaper Medicines Act, which aims to promote and ensure access to affordable quality drugs and medicines, is in place, the pharmaceutical market is faced with various challenges. There is lack of transparency because voluntary licensing is confidential. In agreements, the use of terms is not standardized and depends on the transacting parties. The IP law aims to prevent evergreening, but its impact on the domestic price of medicines has yet to be validated. So for plenary session 3, the same is focused on artificial intelligence and IP in digital platforms, and the question whether it is a forthcoming competition issue. AI has an actual power of reshaping industries. Innovation is accelerating and producing massive data in the process. 70% of technologies with greatest impact for disruption are because of AI. Generative AI could substitute up to 1/4 of current work in the US and Europe. There is a close relationship among competition, AI and IP, because innovation and market interactions make substantial changes in the market. Despite its importance, there is no single definition of AI. Given this, it can be challenging for a competition authority to determine competition issues or violations of the competition law. Collaborating with more mature regulators or other stakeholders with adequate expertise may be a suitable way forward. AI is different from traditional markets because it can expand both the scale and scope of production activities to make better and cheaper products. With AI, new markets are created. In a new market, there are new rules, players, payoffs, and strategies that define the new game. With these rules, new anti-competitive behavior may be generated, resulting in either creative or destructive markets. On the substantial assessment of an M&A transaction, the following is important considerations. First, the assessment of dynamic markets, focusing on dynamic changes. Second, future-looking counterfactuals, which are consistent with the dynamic assessment. Third, uncertainty in mergers where competition authorities can have no definite picture of future market conditions, such as the possible loss of dynamic competition. And fourth, review of important internal documents. And the last, assessment of conglomerate mergers that may have effects on complementary products. Day one also launched the peer review report on Malaysia's advocacy programs. For context, Asean member states have agreed to enhance cooperation measures on the goal of fostering awareness of fair competition in this region. ASEAN targets to conduct 2 peer reviews of competition laws by 2025. Malaysia is the first ASEAN member state to submit a peer review. The experience of the peer reviewers could be useful in making adjustments to the next peer review exercise. The report has identified effective competition promotion strategies and areas to refine communication strategies. Key recommendations include recalibration strategies to expand impact, monitor and evaluate strategies, tap alternative platforms to reach a broader set of stakeholders, and intensify law enforcement. Collaboration and interface with stakeholders with government, especially legislatures and other regulators and the academe are also important. So in finale, do we have time? So as we embark on today's plenary sessions on seeds of innovation, promoting market access in biotech through competition and technology transfer and competition, let us carry the spirit of unity and cooperation that defines the ASEAN region. Thank you. Magandang umaga, umayong buntag sa tanan. Thank you.
Round of applause for Commissioner Peloton. Thank you very, very much. Lots of notes taken from yesterday, Commissioner. Nice one. Thank you. And yes, that was a really immersive synthesis and recap of day one. It's really nice to know that all that information was absorbed. And it was a good reminder from our dear Commissioner. So before we move on to the fourth session, don't be alarmed if you hear a fire bell around 10:30 a.m. It's only a testing. Fire bell sound alarm testing. There's no real fire, and it might occur around 10:30. Stay in your seats. We've been forewarned already that it will happen around 10:30 a.m. And then for the sessions, just like yesterday's format, we will be continuing by me introducing first our moderator. Each session will be led by a moderator. Then presentations from the panelists or speakers will follow. Some of them are actually online, joining us from abroad. And then an opportunity to pose your questions to our panelists will happen via a QR code. May I ask that QR code to be flashed again on screen? And can I ask everyone to please scan the QR code so that you can keep sending questions. Yesterday, because of time issues, we actually were only able to pick 1 to 2 questions per session, but it just really goes to show a lot of you were engaged, and we hope to have that same engagement with all of our audience today. Everybody, here's the QR code. I'll give you a moment to scan it. You can also open a browser, type in slido.com, and then plug in the numbers 2478439. Then join event. All questions will be entertained via Slido. Thank you very, very much. All right, without further ado, here's our fourth session. Developments in biotechnology have contributed greatly to the agricultural sector by increasing the region's productivity, especially in the face of worsening climate change and increasing input costs. This was actually touched on by one of our speakers yesterday. However, rising market concentration due to recent mergers and acquisitions threatens farmers' access to biotech as risks of dominance abuses increase and continue. This fourth session seeks to address how IP and competition policies can work hand in hand in elevating local biotech innovation while promoting market access. And leading this session, we have our moderator from the Philippine Competition Commission, Commissioner Lolibeth Ramit Medrano. Good morning, Commissioner. I'd like to introduce your panel. I believe we'll have to do the photo op after because our US speaker is still logging in. So please allow me to introduce the panelists who will be with Commissioner. Oh, she's here. Okay, here we go. We can have a photo op. Commissioner, please come up. You will be joined by your panelists, Professor at the National Institute of Molecular Biology and Biotechnology, Dr. Reynaldo Garcia. Dr. Ajay Kohli as well is joining them, Interim Director General of the International Rice Research Institute. Can we have everyone forward for a photo op? And Mr. Marcus Mayer is back, the senior attorney of the Bureau of Competition and U.S. Federal Trade Commission. Online, we have her with us already. Joining us from the United States, the Assistant Chief and Special Counsel for Policy and Intellectual Property at the U.S. Department of Justice Antitrust Division, Ms. Jennifer Dixon. Ms. Dixon, you're actually on screen. Can we ask you to keep smiling? You're joining the photo op happening here in Manila right now. Everyone keep smiling, please. We got it. Thank you very much. I turn you over to Commissioner Medrano. Good morning.
Thank you, Isa. Good morning, everyone. I hope you all had a good night's rest and were fully recharged for today's session. So, can I get either a loud yes or a big thumbs up, please? Yes. Good morning. So, this morning, we continue to collectively learn about the interplay of seemingly opposing but complementary regimes of intellectual property and competition law. And yesterday, we covered the pharmaceutical sector. And for this session, we will focus on how competition law and policy can be used to promote access in biotechnology. So, as we all know, agriculture is one of the key industries in the region, with 8 out of 10 ASEAN member states dependent on the agricultural industry. The region is a major exporter of palm oil, crude rubber, rice, sugar, seafood, and fruits. And in 2021, it may be interesting to note that ASEAN produced more than 150 million tons of rice, over 42 million tons of corn, and more than 40 million tons of sugar, among others. However, the agriculture sector is widely considered as one of the drivers of land degradation and carbon emission. And at the same time, it's one of the most vulnerable sectors to the adverse effect of climate change. Experts report that climate and weather characteristics such as rainfall, water resource, temperature, and carbon dioxide directly influence the agricultural production in the region. And they estimate that rice yield in Southeast Asia might decrease by as much as 50% because of floods, droughts, and heat stress. And with high awareness of the adverse impact of climate change in the agricultural sector in the region, ASEAN leaders have continuously pushed for enhanced resilience to climate change through national and regional efforts. So recently, ASEAN leaders welcomed the adoption of the ASEAN Guidelines for Sustainable Agriculture to promote a sustainable and circular economy in food and agriculture. So even as we grapple to fully understand the magnitude and scope of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, characterized by the fusion of digital, physical, and biotechnologies, we are now transitioning to the Fifth Industrial Revolution from the document released by the European Commission entitled Industry 5.0 towards a sustainable, human-centric, and resilient European industry in January of 2021. The fifth IR is defined by a special focus on the power of industry to achieve societal goals beyond jobs and growth, to become a resilient provider of prosperity by making production respect the boundaries of the planet and placing the well-being of the industry worker at the center of the production process. So for this session, we are fortunate to have scientists and experts from the biotechnological industry and legal experts from the competition and enforcement agencies who will be sharing their insights, their expertise, and experiences on this topic. We will hear first from Dr. Reynaldo Garcia, who will discuss the characteristics of the biotech industry. Is it similar to or is it different from the pharmaceutical sector, as well as market access, competition, and IPR in the biotech field? Dr. Garcia, please.
Okay, good morning, everyone. As the first panelist to speak in this session, I thought that I should clarify the differences between the biotechnology sector and the pharmaceutical sector, historically and technically. I thought that I should also highlight some peculiarities of the biotech sector, biotechnology products, and the way business is done in biotech. The main reason being that there could be repercussions in terms of respect for IP rights, market access, and antitrust enforcement. So the scope of biotechnology is actually broad, although the introduction is more about agri-biotech. You could see from our institute logo that there are 4 colors there. Red is actually for red biotechnology, which is the biomedical sector. And then you have green, which is agri-biotech. And then you have white for industrial biotechnology. And then you have blue for marine biotechnology. So of course, the biggest segment of the biotech sector is the biomedical sector, red biotech, followed by agri-biotech. Okay, this is just to show you the main difference between the pharmaceutical sector and the biotech sector. So you see here on the very left, the small molecule drugs. They are the tablets and capsules that we take and are most familiar with. And then the rest of them are actually the innovations in biotech. So you see the innovations that are happening in the biotech sector, and the drugs as we know them in the next decade or so will be very much different. So you have, for example, biologics. They are actually things like insulin or erythropoietin. They are not amenable to synthesis. Unlike the small molecule drugs, the drugs we normally take, it is amenable to chemical synthesis. The rest of them are not. So they are macromolecules, so we have to produce them in living systems, like insulin is actually produced in bacteria, and then you have the monoclonal antibodies that are produced in mammalian cells. So you see the major differences there. And then you also have therapeutic vaccines. Most of you probably have not heard about therapeutic vaccines. Our notion of vaccines are prophylactic or preventive. Therapeutic vaccines are curative in nature, and there are already a couple of therapeutic vaccines that are already available. And then you have therapeutic peptides. That's actually the pride of the Philippines. We're able to prove the inventor of Prialt is actually Dr. Toto Oliveira, who is from the Philippines, and the source are the conus nails in the Visayas, except that he wasn't IP savvy, and somebody else patented it, an Irish company. So we have the RNA interference by way of Sirnas and Mirnas, and you have heard about more experimental therapeutic modalities like gene therapy, stem cells, and genome editing, or, for example, CRISPR-Cas9 systems. So you see here that there is a blurring distinction between biotech and pharma. Historically, they were totally different. As I've said, pharma is about chemistry, chemistry-based drugs, and then you have biotechnology. It's about products that are produced in living systems. But they have blurred through time. So we now know that big pharma ventures into biologics, the main reason being they have a thinning pipeline, because the easy to target receptors and kinases, for example, in our body, we already have drugs for them. So they had to look at their innovative cousin, which is the biotech sector, to come up with or to fill in their thinning pipeline. And then there are also a few biotech companies that decided that they want to go into small molecule drugs. So it's continually blurring. And then biotech, of course, is very good at innovating, and most of this happen in universities and small biotech companies. But then they do not have the marketing arm or the distribution arm of the pharmaceutical companies. And of course, they don't have the amount of money that the pharmaceutical companies have. And because pharmaceutical companies are in fact fully integrated, they could do everything from beginning to end. Unlike biotech companies, most often they're only able to do R&D up to proof of concept. And then scale up, it has to be passed on to the bigger players, which are your multinational pharmaceutical companies. So once they were different, but now they're totally collaborative. Here are some characteristics of the biotech sector and biotech products, which I think have bearing on antitrust enforcement and also market access. And of course, as we try to respect the IP rights of innovators. So you could see here that exclusive licensing is accepted. So that already is partly problematic because some would say that it is partly anti-competitive, but that is how it works for pharma because you need a minimum of $2 billion plus to develop one drug, and then the development time is 12 to 15 years to develop one drug. You start with 10,000 compounds. By the end of the 15th year, you're left with one or two. So the attrition rate is very high and everything's so expensive that it doesn't make sense that you will grant licenses to several players because they will not have their return on investment if the market is so divided. Hence, it is standard practice that in the case of drug discovery and development, exclusive licenses is actually the norm. And then for smaller players, for example, the biotech companies, the preferred exit strategy is in fact trade sale. The biotech companies have to be bought, firstly because they don't have the money to proceed with further development. So what they'll probably do is do the in vitro studies, the animal studies, and then luckily, if they're able to push it to phase 1 clinical trials, that will up their valuation, and then it's time to sell the entire company because they don't have the resources and the capability to push it to clinical trials and all the way to marketing. So when venture capitalists look at the proposals of biotech companies when they ask for money, it is already a given that most of them will probably go for a trade sale at some point. That's why biotech people are called serial entrepreneurs. They will only go up to proof of concept or perhaps phase 1, and then that's it. They will want to be bought, and then they start another company. That's why they are serial entrepreneurs. And then acquisitions are supposed to build pipelines, but of course this is now subject to review, and because some of them are really suspect, as in this recent case of Illumina and PacBio, when they were being investigated for antitrust, they just abandoned the attempted M&A. Collaboration or change of hands is key, as I've said, mainly because of the amount of money that you need to be able to push a product forward. And then patents and IP is the currency for commercialization. And of course, we know that that can insulate a company from generic threat. These are some peculiarities of biologics and other biotech products. So biologics are difficult to replicate. So when generics companies decide to have their own version of an innovator drug, because it's chemistry-based, it will be exactly the same. The only difference probably in some cases are the excipients, the binders that you add to the active pharmaceutical ingredient, but for most purposes, it should be the same. You cannot say the same of biotech. When you try to produce your own version of an original monoclonal antibody, you will not be able to replicate it. It is because it's done in biological systems, and in fact, we have proof in the lab to show that you'll probably come up with something but that is quite similar, but not the same. Hence, the term biosimilar was coined. We cannot use the term generic when it comes to biotech. The term generic is only for chemistry, for chemistry-based drugs. When it comes to biotech drugs, the term biosimilar is used because it is similar but not quite the same. And for that, there is no formal recognition of equivalence or substitutability as far as the regulatory authorities are concerned. And then the process is the product. For example, when you try to mass manufacture monoclonal antibodies in huge tanks the size of this room, you cannot change the procedure. If you attempt to scale it up further or shrink it, the product that you will produce in living systems will be different, and there could be adverse reactions or fatalities. That has already happened with Johnson & Johnson when they tried to tweak the way they manufacture their version of erythropoietin. They had to stop everything because there were adverse reactions in patients. So you see that peculiar characteristic of biotech. And then of course you have comparative effectiveness issue. You know about the existence of NICE in the UK, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence. They determine which one is the most effective and cost effective, and they decide which among the potentially competing products will actually form part of the NHS and could be given free to patients. So there are those issues that actually affect the sector. And of course, royalty stacking, because it's not just about the composition of matter, it's also about the methods that you use to produce a product. So there's a lot of royalty stacking that happens in the biotech sector. So again, I have mentioned most of these things just to emphasize that the reason why the pharmaceutical company has decided to get involved in biotech is because, again, the products are mostly insulated from generic threat because it is hard to replicate. For instance, if this is if my fist is actually the protein you want to produce an antibody against, our immune system actually sees it differently. For example, it could produce an antibody against this part, against that part, etc. They're referred to as epitopes, meaning even if you are targeting the same thing, different companies can produce a different antibody against the same target. So you could see that they don't necessarily have to overlap with other people's IPs. They could generate their own IP. And that is the reason why it is very attractive for companies to venture into, for example, monoclonal antibodies. So this is an example, the first ever successful monoclonal antibody, or rituximab, Rituxan, which is for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and rheumatoid arthritis. When it came out, it became the first blockbuster of Genentech as far as monoclonal antibodies are concerned. So what did the companies do? At that time, I would check, for instance, clinicaltrials.gov, and there are so many clinical trials from different companies trying to imitate rituximab, which is an anti-CD20. Again, on the same principle that this is probably CD20, you could come up with different antibodies against CD20, and everyone will be happy. They'll come up with their own version of anti-CD20. And why do they do that? Because, obviously, the sales potential is already known. They want a slice of the pie. The regulatory pathway is already carved out, meaning the likelihood of success, as long as they follow what Genentech did, is actually carved out. So there are reasons why they want to have a slice of the pie. And really, that happened already in the case of the anti-EGFR therapies. For example, Genentech had this anti-EGFR antibody called cetuximab, and then Amgen came up with their own, which is panitumumab. And both are anti-EGFR therapies. But then it's actually changed, because before, we know about the antibody exception, and it says actually that it's a claim reciting an isolated antibody capable of binding to protein X, and you can in fact claim an antibody which you haven't really produced. On the grounds of a theoretical basis that you are supposed to be able to anticipate it, when in fact you cannot anticipate the composition of matter of the resulting monoclonal antibody. So again, because of the recent case between Janssen and Abbott, this has actually changed. So most courts are questioning what we have come to accept in the last decade or so. So the question is now, do we allow patent claims to inventions that the applicant does not possess? But so many companies got away with it before. They had genus claims claiming everything, and more recently you have the case between Amgen and Sanofi on PCSK9 inhibitors. Just because they were the first ones to work on PCSK9, they were claiming all possible PCSK9 because they really think that they can anticipate all possible products against PCSK9, which is not true. And of course, the courts decided in favor of Sanofi because it is questionable, really, theoretically and scientifically, to claim what you have not done experiments on and proven that it actually works as expected and has a specific composition of matter. So again, I think this is my last slide, and there are many ways by which we can actually try to solve this, at least partly, of course, depending on your own views. I really think that we should have strict enablement requirement. We shouldn't claim what we have not actually invented or something that require substantial experimentation. I was a victim of this when I was working in London. I tried to patent something, and by virtue of the sequence homology, they didn't grant the patent. Even if functionally, it is actually totally different. Just because of the provisions of IP law as recognized in the past. And then overly broad claims should be scrutinized and challenged because, again, it is hard to anticipate composition of matter when it comes to monoclonal antibodies. And lastly, if we really want to innovate, we don't want to totally demonize those who do that. If we really want to innovate, we all know about white space analysis when we do our freedom to operate analysis. We should do white space analysis and innovate in clear areas. I mean, PCSK9 is not the only target for reducing our low-density lipoprotein or bad cholesterol. People don't want to think anymore. They just want to follow what others are doing. That's why problems arise. So I think it more or less demonstrates how complicated biotech is and how things are protected, and it's only now that all these things are being questioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ray Garcia, for that very informative presentation on the biotech industry. I think this nicely leads us to the topic of our next speaker. Director General Ajay Colli of the International Rice Research Institute, an international research and training organization with its headquarters in Los Baños, Laguna, about 2 hours from here. So, DG, why would you want to be involved in this kind of a conference? But I know that you're raring to share with us the expertise and the experience of IRI in terms of first-hand, on-the-ground biotech research and development.
Thank you very much. Well, good morning, everybody. As Beth just mentioned, it's not, well, firstly, it's not easy to come and speak about agriculture after somebody has spoken about the pharma industry. It's far more evolved sector. And it becomes even more difficult when you're an international public goods organization, which is what the International Rice Research Institute is. I hope most of you know about it a little bit, or at least you know where it is, being from the Philippines. It's been there for the last 60 years and has done some amazing work over the last 60 years. Mainly during the 60s and 70s, it is credited with having given the green revolution through rice. So there is an institute, sister institute in Mexico, which deals with maize and wheat. And that is credited with green revolution through wheat. And it is IRI in Los Baños, which is credited for the green revolution through rice, mainly in South Asia and Southeast Asia, which is where rice is a staple anyway. So I don't have a slides or a presentation, and the reason for that is one, we are not as evolved in this field of IP and competition and antitrust, etc. But I wanted to take the opportunity, and I thank the organizers for actually inviting IRI over here, in terms of, what does agricultural biotechnology mean in terms of markets, but also the approach of the industry to small-scale farmers is very different to what public sector has. And that is basically the remit mostly left to the governments. And those governments, national governments, then depend on such national and international organizations, research organizations, to come up with solutions. And I'll go through a couple of examples in those solutions, which would not really be touching on the market aspects of it, or even so much on the IP, but the need for IP. And I want to start with just saying that when we talk of agricultural biotechnology, what we mostly come up with are the GMOs. And in the recent contexts, it is to do with gene editing. GMOs have had a long history now, nearly 30 years history, or more than that, nearly 40 years. Some countries are very keen on it. Other countries, especially European countries, are not very keen on it. And there's a lot of rigmarole around how you can actually take a GMO to the market. And I should say a genetically modified plant instead of a GMO, which could be a microbe as well. So the genetically modified plants are seen as very useful in Latin America, for example. In some cases, even in Asia. But in Europe, they have a big problem, and there are different reasons for that problems. But what I want to actually move on to is to say that biotechnology and agriculture itself is now moving on to a very different era. Agriculture in the next 10 years is going to be an extremely different undertaking than what we know of today. And that is because of all the, or at least some of the bits that you may have heard in terms of artificial intelligence, which manifests in terms of the unmanned aerial vehicles, the drones, etc., that are being used. The digitization aspects of even the tractors. The tractors, while they are passing through the fields, they have sensors attached to them, and they can look at the plant health, they can look at the soil health, etc. And so all that data is obviously then analyzed by AI. And I might mix up a couple of things over here, but what I want to just transition on very quickly to say is that we know through our engagement in what we call bioinformatics, which deals with DNA sequencing, that you can have some very expert people who can analyze the sequence really, really well. And they can give you all the information about, what are the homologies and what are the clusters, what are the bins, and those sequence analysis can be presented to you very easily. But the interpretation of that analysis is the critical thing, because this is all about biology. And unless a biologist can actually have a look at that analysis and actually interpret the biological significance of that analysis, we would not go very far. And that is the same case in artificial intelligence also. So let me go back to where I was trying to drive agriculture in terms of integration with biology, with technology in terms of drones, with technology in terms of new machines, and they need not be fancy machines, and in technology in terms of AI per se, in terms of analytics, etc. And then you combine that with climate change. Now, I hope this does not really go out in a big way, but somebody yesterday I was talking to mentioned that geologically, we were supposed to be, by this time, in another ice age. So 10,000 years after the first ice age, we were supposed to be, or maybe there have been others, I'm not an expert on that. But it seems like we should have been in an ice age. And one of the reasons we are not in ice age is the climate change aspect through anthropogenic activities, which is all about our emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. It was mentioned earlier, the agriculture sector is now supposedly a big factor in greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, Vietnam has greenhouse gas emissions up to 50% from agriculture, which is more than what they have from transport and industry. And so the only way they can actually reduce their greenhouse emissions is actually reduce emissions from the agriculture sector. So if you start combining the gene editing, the drones aspects of artificial intelligence, the climate change, etc., and the solutions that will come through these technologies, so like the monitoring and reporting and validation technologies of climate change, for example, they are going to drive agriculture into a very different sector. And while we are trying to, we are seeing that the industry is very interested, the real solutions, because these are basic science, fundamental upstream science, they're coming from organizations like IRRI and CIMMYT in Mexico and from university areas. And I think this is where the real problem starts.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay.
Your attention, please. The hotel will be conducting in few minutes an emergency public address system testing. Please stay calm. There is no need to evacuate the hotel as this is only a test. Thank you for your understanding and cooperation.
Well, thank you for letting us know that, because I thought my time was over. So,
Good morning, ladies and
okay, I think I'll continue. So,
conducting in few minutes an emergency public address system testing. Please stay calm. There is no need to evacuate the hotel as this is only a
Yeah.
test. Thank you for your understanding and cooperation.
there are two other aspects I would quickly like to mention, which I'm not sure they have been mentioned till now. One of them is the microbiomes, and the other is the genomic selection for breeding crops. Now, when we talk of biotechnology in agriculture, we actually think mostly, as I said, of GMOs, etc. But we forget that in the last nearly 30 years, the new varieties of rice and, of course, many other crops have come through what we call marker-assisted selection. And that is all to do with genetic understanding of your crops and of what we need from those crops in the future. And so if we go back to the point that most of this is done in universities, in international organizations, I can continue? No.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention please. There is an emergency in the building. Please evacuate.
A fire alarm testing happening here at the Conrad Hotel. That's why we are pausing our program, because our speaker cannot be understood while it's happening. So to our audience online, we are pausing just for 2 more minutes to finish the fire alarm testing. Don't go away. Our session continues after 2 minutes. There you go. If you're online, don't go away. Back to our speaker.
Wonderful. Thank you. The announcements took much longer than the alarm, actually. So, just going back to catching up, because I don't have a presentation, I hope I can go back to the right point. The issue is that we've existed for a long time, and so have many other institutes that have provided solutions to the agricultural sector through biotechnology, not necessarily always through the GMO approach or a genetically modified plants approach. As I said, the latest crop of varieties, and crop in a different sense here, of rice, wheat, maize, or whatever vegetables and even flowers, is through breeding technologies which involve biotechnology, which is not very much appreciated recently because of all the gene editing and GMO hype taking over. Now, these solutions have come mostly through public sector because the private sector was generally going through their own IP aspects and generating their own products, which sometimes were useful, sometimes were not useful, but were pushed actually. And there are enough reasons. I could go into one particular example, which might interest you a lot, because it is not talked about a lot. We are all familiar with the short duration and short stature wheat and rice varieties, right? What we forget is that while reducing the stature and the height of wheat and rice was very useful in some respects, which is called lodging. They would not fall over. So it was very useful to plant and harvest. What we forget is that what came along with that, at least in rice, was drought susceptibility and high need for higher amounts of nitrogen. And we have data at IRI to prove that the gene that actually makes the stature of rice shorter, and which is supposedly till today, till recently, seen as a very big advantage, is actually very closely linked with drought susceptibility. And because we wanted most of our rice varieties to be short-statured, we were using that initial genomic engine to actually have other varieties coming across which were also short, but were also coming with drought susceptibility. The initial green revolution was only on irrigated areas, and so there was enough water in the irrigated areas. But as soon as you go to the upland areas, those varieties don't do very well because they are drought susceptible. Now, there are lots of land races and there are lots of traditional rice races which do very well under less water, but we have lost that. Similarly, we have also lost the capacity for the plants to take enough nitrogen and metabolize enough nitrogen internally. Not many people will talk about this, and I'm probably sticking my neck out over here, but we have data to show that all these modern varieties need a lot more nitrogen than the land races, right? So there are ways of actually being able to get the same amount of yield in less amount of nitrogen, right? So there are these kind of issues and aspects about how certain products were pushed, even though they were very useful when they were pushed in the 60s and 70s. But we are now aware of those aspects, and how do we deal with it now? So the coming together, as was mentioned by Professor Ray, of these innovations which reach up to a proof of concept, of proof of value stage, they have to be taken up by the private companies to actually then go out and scale them out to reach the farmers and to reach the customers. That has been not as effective in the agriculture sector as in the pharmaceutical sector. It is now becoming much more effective, or there is at least much more interest of the private sector coming to the universities, coming to the international organizations. And the reason for that is the carbon credits. I don't think, again, much has been talked about in this meeting about carbon credits, which is a sector very much in a flux, and people and companies and corporations that have the power to dictate those terms are going to dictate those terms. And I think we should look at the carbon credits as well in terms of how they can be dictated and how processes and products that are useful for so-called climate change aspects or mitigating climate change aspects will again end up being in the hands of a select few corporations. So they are now interested in trying to come to us and ask for all the tools and technologies that can help them get the carbon credits. And there's a lot of talk about small-scale farmers benefiting from this, but the dynamics of the entire operation is not suitable for a small-scale farmer to benefit from it. It will again be beneficial to mostly the large or medium, at least, scale people. But not all is lost. I was giving an example in the morning to Mr. Meyer here. Over the last 25 years, we have worked really, really hard in a tripartite collaboration with PhilRice, which is the National Rice Research Institute of the Philippines, and the company Syngenta to, in the last year or so, bring out what we call the golden rice, the vitamin A rice. And it is now being grown in 7 different municipalities. That's the first GMO, which is on the main staple crops. Although there is GMOs or genetically modified plants from maize, but they are not used as food. They're used mostly as feed. So this is the first time it has happened. So it took a long time. I think what we need to really do is have a stable and a very coherent and harmonized regulatory system, which does not take 25 years for a product to come to the market. I think that's very critical. What is also very critical is whether it be through the interest of carbon credits or whatever, but public and private sectors has to work very closely together to realize that there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of products and processes that are already existing. So for example, number of new AI companies which are run by 2 or 3 smart kids in their 20s or early 30s, they come to us and they want our 60 years of breeding data, because that data can be extremely useful for them to predict which lines and which crosses are going to be the best for the future in the climate change, right? We need to be very careful of these kind of collaborations, but those collaborations are extremely important. And as I said, with AI, with the drones, and with aspects of climate change taken into consideration, agriculture is going to be a very, very different scenario in the next 10 years. I will give you just one example and I'll finish my presentation or my talk here, which is we are all familiar with rice needing a lot of water. 1 kilogram of rice production needs 3,400 liters of water, 3,400 liters of water is needed for 1 kilogram of rice. Okay? Different studies will give you a little bit or little more, less or more. And then we see most of the women and the farmers bent over in transplanting rice. Water is becoming rare, labor is becoming rare, and when we transplant rice with standing water, that is what actually releases methane, which is called the greenhouse, one of the greenhouse gases. So there is a process called direct seeded rice. And in Cambodia, it is very, very well used, parts of Vietnam. In Malaysia also it is used, but it is used not very effectively. What IRI has recently done, it has really standardized direct seeded rice. It needs nearly 1/3 or even less of water. It does not need you to bend over and transplant your rice. And there is 60%, there is scope of 60% reduction of methane emissions from that. But to scale that, we need machines, we need digitized sensors, we need drones, and we need water management solutions, again, which can be made through AI. So it's an integrated approach that we are trying to take out. And so we would really need IP and market aspects and competition aspects built into realizing whether the drones and the climate change solutions, whether the water management solutions, all of them, how they can be brought together to actually make a difference to agriculture. And in terms of seeds, the new seeds will keep coming all the time. So we are now actually producing rice which is meant for direct seeded rice. Because previously when direct seeded rice was tried, it was tried with varieties that are meant for transplanted rice. And so the yield would go less. And everybody would say, direct seeded rice will not work. But the point is, you cannot use transplanted rice varieties to test for direct seeded rice. So we have now produced varieties that are suitable for direct seeded rice, but they can be useful even for transplanted rice. So I want to stop just by saying that just like the success that we have had with Syngenta, Erie, and Phil Rice coming together to release the vitamin A enriched golden rice after nearly 25 years, there should be more examples of private sector and public sector coming together with clear and harmonized regulatory aspects, the stewardship aspects, and the IP and the market competitiveness aspects built into these solutions. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, DG Collie, and I think everyone heard you when you talk about the need for cooperation and partnership and convergence between regulators, the private sector, competition law, and intellectual property. And thank you for that very insightful and informative talk. I think everyone would agree that we know a little bit more about rice and a lot of the R&D that goes into it. But just to perhaps concretize a bit more the impact of what Erie has been doing. I think in 2005, it was reported that about 60% of the world's rice area has been planted with Erie bred rice varieties and its derivative. I wonder if it's a higher figure now. It's now 70%. So that's a lot of work, and we're thankful that Erie is continuing its relentless effort to provide rice to the greater part of the world's population. So we've covered the agri-biotech perspective, and I think it's about time to talk about the other side of the fence, which is the regulators. Marcus, I know your 15 minutes yesterday was not enough, and since you've taken a 12-hour-long trip just to be here, we're making your life a little bit harder because we're going to ask you about the enforcement and competition concerns that the U.S. Federal Trade Commission has been addressing in the products of biologics and biosimilars. So, if you could just indulge that a little bit further.
So yesterday I took on the challenge of doing 25 years in 15 minutes. Because the biosimilars and biologics are a bit newer, I only have to do 15 years in 15 minutes. So here goes. I'm going to talk about and explain some of the potential antitrust issues involving biologics and biosimilars. And the reason I have the word potential is because there haven't really been a lot of cases brought yet in the United States involving biologics and biosimilars. I'm not saying there's not any, but not very many. We have done a lot of investigations, but they have not led to litigated cases that are a matter of public record. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's at stake for U.S. consumers, because this area is huge and it's going to get bigger and bigger, as Dr. Garcia so aptly described in his presentation. I am going to highlight some actions the FTC has taken to promote competition, and I'm going to finish, just like I did yesterday, giving you some sources to look at, because again, what can I say in 10 minutes? But if you're interested in anything I talk about, there's a lot more information available on the FTC's websites and in other places on the web. So potential antitrust issues, this should actually be pretty common and very easily understood for all the enforcers here. It's just potentially any of the kinds of antitrust cases we do could be a potential case in the area of biologics and biosimilars. That could involve agreements that restrain trade. It could involve monopolization and attempted monopolization, or what much of the world calls abuse of dominant position. And it could involve mergers and acquisitions. I did purposely highlight that little last yellow piece there. Yesterday I talked about product hopping. Yesterday I talked about pay for delay. Those could happen in this area, though again, nobody has yet brought such a case, not the Europeans, not us in America. But this disparagement issue is somewhat unique to biosimilars. What we're talking about here is that there is a perception that because biosimilars are not the same as biologics, they might not be as good as the biologics. And some doctors have this perception, and some patients have this perception, and some health plans have this perception. And there's been interesting investigations being done by the Europeans and by us in America as to whether the industry is purposely going out, the biologic industry is purposely going out and trying to make the biosimilars seem not as good and disparage them. And it's a theory of possible monopolization theory. It's possible abuse of dominance theory if indeed companies are going out of their way to disparage a biosimilar and essentially flood the market with false information. What's at stake for U.S. consumers? Well, there's a lot, because even though biologics are relatively new, they're not entirely new, but especially the biosimilars, they account for almost 46% of all the drug spending in the United States. I don't know if the product here in the Philippines is known as Humira, but is that familiar product? The generic name is adalimumab. It's the single biggest drug product in the world. It has more than $200 billion worth of sales. In 1 year alone, a few years ago, there were $30 billion worth of sales. It's the biggest non-COVID related drug of all times. And it's a big product in America. It's coming off of, it's not coming off of patent, but it's soon going to have biosimilars. There are some biosimilars available in other places in the world. One of the aspects of this particular biologic product, in addition to being just a huge, very, very important high dollar sales product, they've applied, AbbVie, the company that makes it, has applied for more than 311 patents and has had more than 160 patents granted for this one product. So that, again, this kind of plays on Dr. Garcia's point that the patenting estate is very important in the area of biologics. Anyway, more facts and figures if you're interested in this report from IQVIA. You can find it. It's called IQVIA Biosimilars in the United States 2023 to 2027, and it has lots more facts and figures about this market in America. So we haven't done a lot of enforcement actions, but we have done a lot of policy actions. And this actually started back in 2008, and I'm highlighting two of them. So if you're interested, you can follow up and go on to the FTC's website and find this staff report called Emerging Healthcare Issues Follow-on Biologic Drug Competition, where we did a study early on as these follow-on biologics or biosimilars were first being developed, and we talk about all the potential competition issues related to biologics and biosimilars. The second thing I've highlighted was an FTC and FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, the sector regulator in the United States. We did a joint statement with them, and we did a workshop with them, and we issued a report. And the interesting thing, I guess a little bit coincidentally, this program we did together, a workshop we did with the FDA at their headquarters, together with the FTC, was done in March the 9th of 2020. That was the Tuesday before everything shut down due to COVID. We all went home on Thursday for the next year almost, working from home. But it was that same week we did this joint workshop, and there's a report where we talk about the different issues that were raised during that conference. So again, if you're interested, those would be good things to look at. A couple other actions we've taken. We did issue a policy statement in 2022 about rebates and fees. One of the things we're seeing, in addition to the disparagement issue, we're seeing some interesting practices going on where the biologic company is incentivizing the health plans and others not to put the biosimilar on their formularies, not to make the biosimilar available, and they're doing this through different pricing practices and rebating practices, so we have a statement about that. And we have brought one enforcement action in the merger realm where we blocked Amgen's acquisition of certain products from Horizon Therapeutics. In the end, what we were concerned about there was that they were bundling these two products together and that they would bundle the sales in the future and that these bundled sales would disadvantage biosimilar products, and they entered an agreement after we filed a lawsuit not to bundle these products going forward, but the actual merger was allowed to go through. And just like I said yesterday, lots more information available on the FTC's website. So I point you to that if you're interested in anything I said. Again, I know I went very quickly, but hopefully I've pointed you to a few sources that you might find useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you for people who are vertically challenged like me and talking about the context of mergers and acquisitions. But anyway, thank you, Marcus, for sharing some of the policy developments in the FTC. And certainly we have pointed us and we take note of some of the future policy directions that we should be looking at closely in the PCC. So now, I think the talk of Marcus neatly leads us to Jennifer, who will be discussing antitrust enforcement and IP concerns at the US DOJ. Hi, Jennifer. Good afternoon.
Hello. Good morning to you all.
Can you hear us?
Oh, can you hear me?
But we can't hear you, so let us just fix that, please.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yeah, I think that's better. Okay. So Jennifer,
perfect.
would you like to start your presentation now?
Yes, thank you for inviting me here. I wanted to, of course, begin with the usual disclaimer that my remarks today are not necessarily those of the Department of Justice. But I did want to go over some principles, antitrust enforcement in the US, and some key legal principles that affect intellectual property and antitrust, sort of principles that we work from as a competition agency, and then go into some recent law enforcement activity that is relevant to this space. Next slide, please. And next slide. All right, so I'm going to talk about antitrust enforcement in the United States. You're probably wondering why you have both Marcus and myself here. And for those of you that are not familiar, there are two agencies, federal agencies in the US that enforce the antitrust laws, the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice where I work. The Department of Justice does enforce civil antitrust laws, but we also enforce criminal, the criminal aspects of the Sherman Act. that the FTC does not do. So we have that authority, and I'm going to be talking about a recent enforcement action involving price fixing of generic pharmaceuticals in a few minutes. Next slide, please. The states also have enforcement authority in this area. They have the ability to challenge mergers and anti-competitive conduct that affects the residents in their states. So that's just something to keep in mind as well in terms of who is enforcing the antitrust law in the U.S. So next slide. So let me talk about some key legal principles in this area at the intersection of antitrust and intellectual property, all which would apply to agreements that affect biologics and pharmaceutical licensing. Next slide. So a really core principle, enforcement principle that we like to follow in the US is that antitrust law and intellectual property laws work together. There's not tension between these two laws, even though intellectual property rights create exclusive rights. Both can facilitate competition, and promote innovation in different ways. Another important point to remember in this area is that there are no exceptions for intellectual property in the antitrust laws. So if you have an anti-competitive license, it's going to be subject to antitrust enforcement. Dr. Garcia mentioned exclusive licensing that occurs very often in this space. Exclusive licensing is going to be subject to antitrust scrutiny. It may not be illegal, but it is subject to antitrust analysis, and we analyze it under sort of a flexible rule of reason type analysis to weigh the harms, potential harms to competition against the benefits. And standard antitrust analysis applies. So I'll give an example of that in just a moment when we talk about market power. Next slide. So as I said, standard antitrust analysis applies to intellectual property. So we do not presume that an intellectual property holder has market power just because it holds an intellectual property right, a patent on a biologic, a patent on a pharmaceutical. That does not necessarily give the holder market power. We're going to look at the relevant market. We're going to look at whether close substitutes exist for the product covered by the intellectual property. We'll look at substitute technologies or other products that might be relevant and prevent the exercise of market power by the intellectual property holder. And this is just applying the standard principle that we have to assess market power of an individual company based on whether there are substitutes in the market. Okay, next slide, please. Since we're talking about the seeds of innovation, I wanted to talk about just innovation incentives and how antitrust and intellectual property both promote innovation. So antitrust does this by addressing anti-competitive conduct that can hinder and impede innovation. Intellectual property provides incentives for pro-competitive innovation. And enforcement policy really respects the rights of intellectual property holders, but does look at abuses of those rights that might go beyond the scope of what's allowed by the intellectual property protection. Next slide, please. Right, so I wanted to talk a bit about competition advocacy. The Department of Justice has engaged in some competition advocacy in this area. Next slide. We, first of all, apply a whole of government approach to competition in the U.S. And really more competition means lower prices, higher wages, more innovation. So we like to work with our regulatory partners to make sure other regulatory agencies to make sure regulations are not creating unnecessary barriers to entry, and that the agencies talk to each other about competition. And a lot of this conversation stems from President Biden's executive order on competition, which talks about promoting competition in the U.S. economy, gives federal agencies directives on ways to promote competition. 14 of the directives relate to intellectual property specifically, and some of those directives call on the agencies to rethink policies to make sure that patent rights aren't unnecessarily prohibiting or impeding competition in any way, for example, in seeds or other inputs, or in standard essential patents that might have market power. Next slide, please. We engaged in some recent competition advocacy that relates to patenting before the USPTO. The PTO had an initiative to find out from the public how it can ensure reliability of patent rights and requested information. And we at the Antitrust Division and the department supported PTO's efforts in this area to try to improve patent quality. And, you know, one of our points that we made in a written comment submission to the PTO related to this initiative was that the patent prosecution process should not facilitate strategies that unnecessarily impede or delay generic entry. I think Marcus just mentioned product hopping, patent thicketing are some strategies, you know, that may have that effect. And, you know, we asked the PTO to certainly consider, you know, how its review of a patent can facilitate competition and not facilitate these types of patenting strategies that delay generic entry. We also supported PTO's efforts to coordinate more with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration on pharmaceutical and biologics, and really use that coordination to improve the accuracy of patent examination. So we applauded the PTO for and the FDA for taking those efforts. Next slide, please. So I want to move away now from competition advocacy and talk about some law enforcement activity. Of course, the Department of Justice is a law enforcement agency. And as I said, we do have jurisdiction to investigate criminal violations of the antitrust laws, which include price fixing, bid rigging, and market allocation. And recently, the department conducted a multi-year investigation into price fixing, bid rigging, and market allocation, specifically schemes that affected generic drugs that were used to treat diseases and chronic conditions. And several generic pharmaceutical companies were charged in this investigation. All 7 companies resolved those charges, and the companies paid criminal fines and penalties of over $681 million. And I'll talk about 2 groundbreaking resolutions, you know, as a result of this investigation. But this investigation just demonstrates the antitrust risk with, you know, talking to competitors about pricing and not having adequate antitrust compliance policies in place. So let me go on to the next slide. So in 2023, just in August, just a few months ago, really, the DOJ entered into deferred prosecution agreements with two pharmaceutical companies, Teva and Glenmark. And these deferred prosecution agreements did a number of things. So they resolved the criminal charges that, you know, these companies engaged in conspiracies to fix prices, rig bids, or allocate markets. And they included the large penalties that I mentioned. So $250 million was the criminal penalty that Teva paid. $30 million was what Glenmark paid. But what I really wanted to highlight here was these DBAs had a divestiture, which was the first time we've done that in a criminal case, had a divestiture as a remedy. And both of these companies agreed to divest a key business line that was part of the conspiracies that they engaged in. And this was a cholesterol drug that they manufactured that they had to divest as a result of committing these antitrust crimes. Another groundbreaking aspect of this agreement with the government was that Teva agreed to donate $50 million in generic drugs to humanitarian organizations. And both of these companies agreed to cooperate with the DOJ and improve their antitrust compliance programs as appropriate to make sure that anti-competitive conduct like this does not occur in the future. Next slide, please. So I just want to circle back on some interagency cooperation. I think Marcus talked about some of the some examples in his list, so I'm not going to repeat those. But next slide, I want to talk about a couple, just one. I think Marcus mentioned, you know, the task force on pharmaceutical mergers, and also, you know, workshop on pharmaceutical mergers that we've done with our state and federal and international partners, looking at how market concentration and innovation affected those markets. But I also wanted to point to a memorandum of understanding that the DOJ signed with our Department of Health and Human Services, which helps the agencies to coordinate a bit better and really facilitate information sharing and have a more efficient resolution of criminal cases as the agencies support each other in these investigations. And I know we're at the end of our time almost, so I wanted to just conclude with one last point. Next slide. Next slide, please. So, you know, what can the agencies do? What can agencies do in this space? I know I talked about pharma, but I think some of these principles can, you know, certainly transfer over to biologics. Certainly the licensing principles that I talked about and intellectual property principles applied. And I think some things that agencies can do to promote competition in biologics is to really embrace this whole of government approach that we have in the U.S. It can really promote competition and reduce barriers to entry if you're talking to other regulators and agency partners to make sure patenting is efficient. There's not unnecessary regulation that creates barriers to entry. And one other, you know, sort of piece of, I guess, advice that I would give is really make the agency accessible. And, you know, I think the Department of Justice has had some success having a complaint center and having that accessible to consumers and workers that can report anti-competitive conduct within an industry and let us know about it. It makes detection a bit easier. So just make sure that the competition agency is accessible to the public, and something like where consumers could go to report conduct is just available to them. So that's all I have. Thank you so much for including me, even though I'm not in the room today.
That wraps up the session, and we're good to take in questions. Okay. I was wondering, Isa, if I could ask the first question from Marcus. And I know, Marcus, we did discuss this a little bit during the briefing, but perhaps if you could talk about the paradigm shift of the Biden administration. Thank you.
Well, actually, I think that Jennifer touched on that. That's the whole of government approach. The fact that the President of the United States, you saw the picture of him wearing the mask sitting at his desk, signed an executive order directing all of the government agencies to take competition issues into account, even as they're doing their regulatory functions and their work. And I think, as Jennifer pointed out, again on her slide, this has led to a lot of additional interagency cooperation across many different government agencies.
How does it differ from the previous administrations?
Well, I think the main difference is that it came from the president directly. I mean, there's always been, DOJ has had a long history of working cooperatively with other government agencies, FTC also, FTC and DOJ, but this was now the President of the United States putting his stamp on this and saying, this is a major initiative of my administration to take competition concerns into account across all of government.
Okay, thank you. So, can we see the questions?
Does anyone have a question? Does anyone have a question? Unfortunately, there's none on Slido. You can raise your hand if you do. This is again biotechnology. All right, I think we're full for info. Yes? Okay. I didn't mean to put you back in the spot, Commissioner, because you just did such a good job recapping yesterday. Thank you very, very much. Commissioner.
So why don't we ask some of the panelists if they would want to add something more to what? Yep. Dr. Garcia or DG?
Hello. Yeah. I think what's clear is that there are gray areas in trying to balance the respect for IP rights and antitrust enforcement, but then we also recognize that there are some practices that are actually driven by purely business considerations. For example, I talked about genus claims, overly broad claims, claiming something that you actually have not invented, but we have come to accept it for at least 2 decades. And I said myself that I was a victim of that. We were refused, we were not granted patents, and even if actually scientifically and technically it's totally different, but because of the practice of granting overly broad patents, I mean, too many claims, etc., that is actually, to me personally, very anti-competitive. And it's a good thing that we have been following, for example, the case of the PCSK9 inhibitors, and I was actually surprised how come they're now siding with the other party, meaning that they refuse to grant a particular company a virtual monopoly just because they were the very first ones to develop a particular type of drug. Doesn't really mean that they can anticipate all other possible iterations of the drug, even if they are in fact totally different. So I think the developments are correct in terms of promoting competition, And we really should not grant too many rights, I think, to pharmaceutical companies. They have to show really that they have actually reduced it to practice rather than just everything is based on theoretical considerations and giving them a claim to everything they want to claim. So.
Thank you for that. Chairperson has a question.
Yeah, I noted earlier in Doc Ray's presentation about how exclusive licensing arrangements are usual in biologics. So my question is either to Marcos or Jennifer. What other factors would you look at when you see an exclusive dealing arrangement involving biologics in terms of antitrust analysis?
What else are you looking at?
Yeah, what else? Because my understanding is exclusivity per se isn't really necessarily anti-competitive or necessarily violative of anti-competition laws. So assuming that this is the norm for biologics, what other factors would you look at in doing the scrutiny of these types of arrangements?
That even if you're exclusive, it's not necessarily anti-competitive. Thank you. Thanks for that, Chairperson. So even if you are exclusive, you're not necessarily anti-competitive.
Jennifer, I'll happily defer to you if you'd like to take that.
Well, I can say, just hearing an echo. In the US, we really look at exclusive licensing under a flexible analysis. It's going to be analyzed under a rule of reason where we would consider the harms of the harms to competition from an exclusive license and the potential benefits. You know, there may be justifications for having the exclusive license, such as, you know, making sure that there's quality control and manufacturing can be scrutinized by the patent holder, and there's a collaboration to make sure that the quality is there for producing the biologic. As Dr. Garcia pointed out, you know, there could be certainly catastrophic harms to patients if you know, these drugs aren't produced according to quality. So I think we would look at the harms and the benefits and weigh those under a rule of reason analysis. And, you know, that's what our IP guidelines say in the US. And, you know, that's, but the bottom line is that these licenses are still subject to antitrust scrutiny, even though they're routine.
Versus benefits. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, Isa, I'd just like to take off from the comment of Dr. Garcia earlier about striking that balance, finding that balance, that delicate balance between exclusive private rights through IP and competition. And I guess that's a challenge for all competition authorities and IP offices as well. So I think this discussion and this conference is certainly a good, you know, a good way to keep on having that conversation. So thank you to our panelists, and thank you for all the participants for your attention. Thank you.
A round of applause for session 4, ladies and gentlemen. That was moderated by Commissioner Medrano. Thank you to our panelists, Dr. Chang, Dr. Garcia, Dr. Colley, Mr. Meyer, and Ms. Dixon, who was online from the US. We're going to take a quick health break. You can simply ask our wait staff should you want to replenish your coffee, but due to what happened to the announcements earlier, we're unfortunately a bit bumped off on time. So we will only have a 5-minute health break, and we'll resume and proceed to the 5th session. Thanks, everybody. Go get up, stretch, enjoy your morning snacks, and we'll resume in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Meron? Oh, ba't wala yung...
Ladies and gentlemen, please settle down. The program is about to begin. Once again, we'd like to invite everyone to please settle down. The program will begin shortly. All right. Once again, good morning, everyone. May I ask you to please take your seats as we are moving into the final session of our conference. This is session number 5 for the 10th ACC. If I may, here's the overview of our last session. Technology transfer refers to the process by which knowledge, skills, methods, and other innovations are actually transferred from one entity to another for the purpose of disseminating technology and scientific progress. Generally, technology transfer is considered to be pro-competitive. However, such transfers may also give rise to antitrust and IP issues, especially when it comes to licensing and clauses that restrict competition. This includes prohibitions on resale and exclusivity arrangements. Ooh, we've touched on that a bit already in the past sessions, so we're going to dive deeper into that. This final session will take into account how crafting strong policy frameworks is absolutely critical in building systems with solid foundations in antitrust, IP law, and technological capacity. And leading this session is our moderator, the former president of the Licensing Executive Society International, Attorney Patricia Bunye. Good morning. Please come up and let's have a photo up with your panelists, Attorney. She's joined by Director Lourdes Marie Tejero of the UP Manila Technology Transfer and Business Development Office, Mr. Lok Xiu Meng, Assistant Chief Executive at the Competition and Consumer Commission of Singapore, Commissioner Peter Crone of the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, and Mr. Toshiro Kashiyama, Investigator at the Mergers and Acquisitions Division of the Japan Fair Trade Commission. Shall we have a photo up? Oh, no on screen. We're all live on stage for the final session. Let's give a round of applause for our panelists. We do appreciate technology having our speakers also abroad, but it's also nice that you all flew in for today's occasion. Thank you, panelists. Attorney, I'll be turning it over to you. Take it away, please. Thanks, Attorney Bunye.
Thank you very much, Isa. And as Isa noted, this is one of the few panels, or the only one, where all the panelists are present in person. So I think that deserves a round of applause, don't you think? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be with you today as the moderator of Plenary Session 5, entitled Technology Transfer and Competition. And before I go on, I would like to thank the PCC for the opportunity to moderate. And, you know, being the last session for the entire conference has its pros and cons. The pro is that, of course, we have heard from all the other speakers and they will provide greater context for what we will discuss right now. But the con is that you might have information overload already. So I hope it's not the latter case. In the previous sessions, we have heard how competition and intellectual property are seemingly in conflict, but in fact, drive the same objectives. The innovations brought about by intellectual property are at the heart of competition and growth as long as IP rights are not abused. And as stated in the overview earlier of our session, in the case of technology transfer, knowledge, skills, methods, and innovations are transferred in order to disseminate technology and scientific advancements. However, there are instances when technology transfer arrangements or agreements contain provisions or conditions that stifle competition. So in our session, we would like to examine a number of issues, including, number 1, the common antitrust or IP law issues that arise in technology transfers. 2, the initiatives and best practices in different jurisdictions, particularly in ASEAN countries, that incentivize technology transfer. 3rd, the legal and policy frameworks that address and possibly mitigate such antitrust and IP law issues. And finally, how the different players in the technology transfer ecosystem can ensure smooth, efficient, and pro-competitive transfers of technology. So I will begin by asking our panelists to very briefly introduce themselves. You will see their detailed profiles in the program booklet. So I will now ask them instead to take a minute or two to tell us more about their respective roles. And I would like to start with Dr. Lourdes Marie S. Tejero, Director of the UP Manila Technology Transfer and Business Development Office.
Thank you, Attorney Patricia, for that introduction. So I'm Lourdes Tejero, the professor at the University of the Philippines, Manila, and also the director of the Technology Transfer and Business Development Office. And our office takes care and manages the different inventions of our faculty, researchers, and students at the university. And just a little note, the University of the Philippines is made up of 8 campuses located nationwide. And our campus is the Health Sciences Center. This will have a bearing on the presentation that I'll be giving because our campus has the Philippine General Hospital, which has 1,500 beds, which caters to 600,000 patients annually, inpatients and outpatients. And that's the reason why our pharmacologists and scientists in our university are able to clinically validate our medicines. And many of the inventions from our university are drugs. So I'll discuss to you more about those in my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tejero. Next, let's hear from Mr. Lok Shu Meng, Assistant Chief Executive, Legal and Enforcement and Consumer Protection Division of the Competition and Consumer Commission of Singapore.
Thanks very much. First off, let me just offer my compliments to the PCC for organizing this event together with the ASEAN Secretariat. I'm very grateful to be here today with all of you, and I'm really happy to have this opportunity to really get together in person and share ideas and learn from each other. For myself, I think I have a somewhat mixed background. I started off in the public service as a public sector lawyer. I worked in the Supreme Court for a year before I became a prosecutor. And after that, I left the public service to join the private sector. I worked in a firm in Singapore called Raja and Tan for about 6 years before I then went back to the public service again. And I spent another 3 years in the Ministry of Law doing policy work before I was sent to the Ministry of Education, where I spent another 6 years as a general counsel there. And then after that, I moved on again to the Attorney General's Chambers before I moved then to the current position in CCCS. So I've been around the block quite a bit. Competition law and policy is actually quite an interesting area to me. And I am an infant compared to many of my colleagues and friends today who are in the room. I look forward to learning from all of you and continuing our conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Shu Meng. Next, we have Mr. Peter Crone, Commissioner, Australian Competition and Consumer Commission.
Well, thank you, Patricia. My name's Peter Crone. I've been a commissioner at the ACCC for 3 years. Like Shui Meng, I've had a bit of an unusual background. I started my career in the public sector, working for our Ministry of Finance. And then I spent a number of years working in politics, working as the Prime Minister's Senior Economics Advisor, and then also a decade or so working in the private sector for some companies advising super funds on their infrastructure and also working as a consultant. Within the ACCC, obviously I'm a commissioner, but I also sit on the Merger Review Committee. I sit on our Digital Platforms Board. I also chair our Consumer Data Right, Open Banking Committee, and also on our Financial Services Competition Board as well. So there's a number of themes there. This convergence theme that's happening across societies is very much at the forefront of a lot of our work. I'm based in Melbourne, but I did my university studies in the University of Western Australia in Perth and also in Canberra at the Australian National University.
Thank you, Peter. And last but not least, we have Mr. Toshiro Kashiyama, investigator of the Mergers and Acquisitions Division of the Japan Fair Trade Commission.
Thank you. I'm now in the M&A division of the JFDC, and I have led our investigation of merger cases this year, and our team is focusing on fields such such as industries and the pharmaceutical, digital sector, and chemical industry. Now, I am in the M&A division as a student from a law firm. Maybe it is not common in. Nice to meet you.
Thank you very much, Toshiro. Now, and thank you to everyone for telling us more about yourselves. Let's begin our discussion by looking at how UP Manila is conducting technology transfer, particularly how it manages the biomedical inventions, or innovations rather, of its faculty and scientists.
Thank you for that. Okay, may we have the slide up, please? So our office, the UP Manila Technology Transfer and Business Development Office, manages the innovations not only from the faculty and researchers, but also from our students. So next slide, please. Oh, okay. Sorry. So for now, we have 110 active disclosures with 198 active intellectual property rights. 12 had been granted patents, more than 50 had been applied for patents, and we have 45 registered utility models, 11 registered trademarks, and 79 copyrights. So I'd like to show you the summary of the innovations we have. Of the 209 IPs filed, 50 of which are for patents and 57 utility model, and we have industrial design 2 and trademark 21 and 79 copyrights. So the registered are 145. I already mentioned to you about the registered patents that we have. Okay, and this is the trend, I hope you're able to see it, of the filings that we have had since 2015 when our office started. Our office is quite young, but the innovators had been doing their inventions since in the 1970s. Our Lagundi, the medicine that's out there in the market, our pharmacologists started working on these herbal medicines as far back as the 1970s. And the main aim of the scientists was to come up with medicines for the Filipinos, to come up with our own medicines, so as to hopefully drive down the prices. I would just like to highlight that even during the pandemic, 2020, 21, 22, you have seen we have one of the highest in terms of filings. So even during those challenging times, the Health Sciences Center, UP Manila, worked hard because there were many needs that came about because of the pandemic. And so what we did was to partner our doctors, health professionals, with the engineers in the other campus. Many of you would know UP Diliman. We have the Engineering, College of Engineering there. And so we came up with teams that work on those specific needs. So those are the granted patents. If you look at them, they are mainly herbal medicines. So to have the same efficiency as the gold standard medicine. The guava ointment, it's for antibacterial, Chaang gubat, leptospirosis prognosticator, mosquito repellent, anti-diabetes formulation, lupus genetic markers. Actually, that's one of the outputs of our very own chancellor in UP Manila. The ergonomic surgical rongeurs, an instrument that you use for surgery. So these are some of the granted patents. So for the commercialized IPs, we have 21 intellectual properties that we have successfully commercialized. It's quite challenging to commercialize an IP because with the pandemic, the industry sector has gone down. But the uptake for the medicines had been quite successful. The Lagundi herbal medicine was also shown to be effective for mild to moderate COVID. In 2020, when there was no medicine yet for COVID and all that, so the Lagundi was there because it was for asthma, cough, and all these things. So it was given for the mild to moderate COVID patients. It was shown to be effective for that. And we have 9 commercialized technologies. Among them would be pharmaceutical drugs, 6 of them. And we have a topical medicine, a medical device, diagnostics, and others. So we have 21 commercialized IP rights with 9 commercialized technologies. We have at present 36 active agreements with 18 active licensees. So these are mostly pharma companies because they have taken our herbal medicines. So our portfolio, the 110 that I mentioned to you, are made up of health and wellness, innovations, digital health and ICT. We have vaccines, cosmetics, diagnostics, therapeutics, medical devices, and many others. So just to give you some examples of what we have. I mentioned to you Vitex Negundo, popularly known locally as Lagundi. It was first licensed in 1995, and we reached the 1 billion sales in 2012 with 11 active licensees at the moment. So that's our first and a successful one. The Sambong comes next with it being first licensed in 1995, and we reached 70 million sales in 2018. And we have 8 active licensees. So these are other examples. There are many of them, but just to give you some idea of what we have the CFI and DEFA-1 prognosticators for leptospirosis. Leptospirosis is very common in the country and other tropical countries during the rainy season. So this one prognosticates what would be the complications that you might possibly have when you get leptospirosis. The eTox is a test kit for pharmaceutical and new psychoactive substances. CBT kit are biomarkers for response to cardiovascular drugs because there are many responses to cardiovascular drugs, and as to how you're going to respond to it, this kit is going to help elucidate that. We have the Chaanggubat. Some people might know this, the herbal drug for relief of GI and biliary colic. We have mosquito repellent. It's an herbal extract. That's why you don't get the side effects of the other anti-mosquito chemicals. Ulasimang bato, I've mentioned to you, is another medicine for hyperuricemia. So that's for the gout, your joints when it gets very painful. So you can have this medicine. I wanted to emphasize these are medicines because they have undergone the 3 required clinical trials required by the FDA. So RxBox is a multi-purpose medical monitoring dashboard. Philippines is an archipelago. There are many areas that are mountainous or hard to reach. And therefore, this box is supposed to get the information, especially from pregnant mothers. And it gets the status of the baby inside. And it relays to the facility, the centers, where you have the experts or the health practitioners who can help the ones at the bedside. Sanipad is one that came out from the COVID. It's a self-contained disinfecting cubicle where the person goes in and gets disinfected, of course with the PPE on. Dissect is one of the newest one. Just a few months ago, our anatomy professors came up with this ergonomic cadaver immersion table. So we have that long range. And with accomplishments of UPMTTBDO, the Intellectual Property Office of the Philippines awarded us the Platinum Award, the highest award, for the innovations for 3 consecutive years, 2020, 21, and 22. If you note, those are the pandemic years. Although we were all online, we were very busy at the time. So if you wish to know more about our innovations, they're all online, our technology briefs. So if you can connect and go to the website, ttbdo.upm.edu.ph, you'll see more of what we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tejero, for all those wonderful examples of how UP Manila has successfully monetized the technologies developed by your faculty and staff. All, of course, with the view of advancing the public good through health innovations. Now, we have had many speakers referring to how there are certain prohibited provisions in our technology transfer arrangements in the Philippines because they are deemed to be anti-competitive. Let's now see how other jurisdictions are dealing with such restrictions within the technology transfer agreements. And we have Mr. Lok Shoo Meng to share what the Competition and Consumer Commission of Singapore is doing in this regard.
Thank you. So let me just start off by saying that through the course of yesterday's discussion, we do realize that amongst intellectual property lawyers and practitioners, as well as competition practitioners, there is a general recognition that technology transfer agreements tend to be pro-competitive. And I think that in Singapore context at least, we also agree with that general policy position. And we recognize that there are a number of reasons why pro-competitive effects do come about from these transfer agreements. Number one, there's obviously an avoidance of duplication. Because as we have heard from some of the presenters yesterday, R&D in order to develop new technologies can be extremely expensive. And consequently, the ability to then transfer that technology into another market can actually help to reduce the amount of costs that other players in that market will have to incur in order to bring that technology to bear and to then develop new products in that market. Second, of course, there is the spreading and decentralization of technology. I think that this actually helps in a sense that you actually open up additional markets when you're able to engage in technology transfer agreements. So you're able to then bring those benefits from that technology into a new market, and hopefully at the same time, following from my earlier point, you bring down the cost of production within that market, and that ultimately helps to benefit consumers. The other benefit that technology transfer agreements has is it actually facilitates the better integration of that technology with other production processes and production inputs within the market. And ultimately, that kind of synthesis between the technology as well as the other processes does result in potentially better products, greater innovation, which also then helps to spur competition and helps consumers. The last point, and I think this then goes full circle back to the beginning, the technology transfer agreements actually do have that benefit of helping to unlock the financial potential of a technology. And ultimately, for people who are engaged in R&D work, if they are able to then reap the benefits, the financial benefits of those kinds of activities, then it actually does spur greater innovation and more R&D. So ultimately, seen in that light, it then creates something like a virtuous cycle. At least that's if you use technology transfers in the right way. But of course, that's a very rosy picture of technology transfer agreements. I think we have to be pragmatic and we have to recognize that technology transfer agreements can potentially give rise to a platform for anti-competitive behavior. And I think Marcus did point out one aspect of it yesterday when he was giving his presentation, and that's basically the reverse payment agreements or pay-to-delay agreements. There are other aspects of this kind of behavior which CCCS has tried to articulate in some of the guidelines that we've put out. So we have a set of guidelines dealing with intellectual property rights and competition law, and some examples are actually found in that set of guidelines. I'll just name a few, if I may. The first example is really the exclusive grant-back agreement. So, as I mentioned, when technology is then transferred from one business to another, there is a possibility that the recipient business will take that technology and enhance it and come up with a better technology, right? Or at least an improvement to that technology. And sometimes in the transfer agreements, you will see parties, the party that is actually granting the license saying, in the event that you do come up with something that is better, I want you to grant me an exclusive right to use that improved technology, and therefore you only give it to me and I do not allow you to actually then share it with any other market player. So you can imagine that when there is this exclusive grant back arrangement, what happens is that the party who receives the technology may very well just use it for a particular purpose, but there will be no incentive on the part of that party to then want to innovate or to enhance that technology, which will then effectively dampen the innovation market for that particular technology. You would also see similar kinds of clauses like restrictions on research and development. Some of these restrictions are not just confined to the recipient being unable to do R&D, but it further prevents the recipient from going to work with other third parties to then develop the new R&D based on the original technology. And again, that dampens the technology market, it dampens the innovation market. We've also seen other instances of clauses such as non-compete clauses. So what I mean by non-compete clauses are essentially arrangements where I tell you that you are to use exclusively my technology that I have licensed to you, and you are not to use that technology with any other third party, and you're not to use the technologies belonging to any other third party as part of your production process. Now, you can see that there might be logical reasons why a licensor will want to take that approach, because if I grant you my technology and I allow you to then collaborate with other people using that technology, there is a risk that some of the trade secrets that are associated with that technology may then fall into the hands of third parties who could potentially be your competitors. So there is sometimes a reason why a non-compete clause would be introduced. Sometimes there's also a further reason. You have that non-compete clause because you want the person who receives your technology to focus only on working on your technology and enhancing the products using your technology. So there could be pro-competitive reasons for it, but just the same, by having these kinds of arrangements, you can potentially dampen the market again by preventing other competitors from actually using their technologies alongside yours. So in a situation where there is actually market power on the part of the party that is granting the license, you could see foreclosure effects, because I'm saying you only use my technology and not the technology of another party. So you could foreclose the possibility of another competing technology operating within that market. The last clause that we've mentioned in our guidelines is actually the non-challenge clause, where essentially when I grant you a license, I will tell you, if you, for any reason, assess that my intellectual property right is actually non-viable, I do not allow you to challenge the viability of my intellectual property rights. It can also take a certain different form, not so much a non-challenge clause, but it could say that in the event that you do challenge my intellectual property rights, I have the right to terminate this agreement and therefore you cease to have access to my technology. So these kinds of clauses, I think collectively, you would see some of them feature in technology transfer agreements. And I think through the issuance of our guidelines, we tried to educate the industry as well as the legal counsels who actually advise their clients about some of the pitfalls if they were to contemplate introducing these kinds of clauses. Thank you.
We were discussing at our table, Shumeng, that CCCS does perform advisory services to other agencies that face competition issues. Would you like to touch a little on that?
Yes. So just to mention that even though we did put out our intellectual property guidelines, I think we have not to date had an opportunity to issue any public decision or any infringement decision relating to such transfer agreements. But that's not to say that we haven't done any work in this particular area. We have another aspect of CCCS's work is that we operate as competition advisors to the government and other government agencies. So we have on occasion been approached by other agencies to say, we are contemplating developing a new kind of technology that will have mass application in Singapore. It would address a number of different areas in Singapore, and we are funding a third party to develop this intellectual property. what kind of competition concerns might arise from such funding agreements. And we've given advice, and obviously I cannot say the details about this particular advice, but I can say broadly speaking that we told the funding authority that if you assess that this intellectual property is going to be of mass application, if you assess that you want the market to be competitive in the future, you may not necessarily want to grant an absolute ownership in the intellectual property to the party that you are funding. You may want to either consider having the government retain the intellectual property, because after all you are funding this endeavor, or alternatively you might want to make sure that the license that you're going to grant is not an exclusive license, so that other parties who may want to come into the market will have an opportunity to then obtain similar licenses, whether it's from the government or from the party that's developing it, so that there will be less barriers to entry in the future. So I think some of this advocacy work that we do, or some of the advisory work that we do, is kind of relevant because you see that in many areas, government sometimes is leading the forefront. We're leading the way in terms of trying to identify areas for innovation. So it is good that government agencies, when they formulate their policies, actually have in mind some of these issues. It's similar to what I think Encik Iskandar was talking about yesterday. Sometimes fellow government agencies will look at us and say, stop asking me questions about the future. I'm interested in the here and now. I just want to get this project done, right? But competition authorities will very often go to them to say, look, hang on a minute. Can you just please think about the long-term effects? And sometimes your innovations and some of these technologies that you're pushing forward could potentially create a natural monopoly. And you may not necessarily want to do that. So in the design of the policy, in the formulating of maybe some of these rules and regulations, we try to encourage agencies to say, leave room for there to be growth, leave room for there to be competition in the future.
Thank you, Shumeng. I'm glad we're tackling this issue of the interplay among the different agencies. It's very important, and it's been a recurring theme throughout the 2 days, the need for cooperation among countries and agencies. And speaking of cooperation among the countries, Australia is one such jurisdiction that has best practices to ensure that innovation is effectively diffused. And we're very fortunate to have Peter Krohn to tell us more about this.
Well, thank you, Patricia, and good morning, everyone. It's very nice to be with you here in Manila on the second day of this conference. And if I could, I'd also like to extend my appreciation to Chair Michael Aguinaldo and his colleagues at the Philippine Competition Commission for hosting us. I wanted to start out by sharing a wonderful piece of art by an Indigenous artist, Lynesse Church, who lives on her traditional lands in Canberra, known as the Ngunnawal country. This artwork shows the importance of listening, sharing, and building knowledge and understanding. We see two shields and people sitting either side of the centre circle, symbolising the rich culture and experience Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people bring and share. The centre circle shows this point of connection and the importance of relationships built through respect, collaboration, and trust. And I think it nicely frames the sorts of discussions we've been having in the past few days. And I think in particular it complements the comment from Commissioner Peloton this morning when he urged us all to carry the spirit of unity and cooperation. But just let me touch for a minute on why innovation matters. Having been an ACCC Commissioner for 3 years now, I've always stressed the importance of context in the Commission's deliberations. Context is important because it shapes much of what we do and how we understand issues, how we get to the meaning and purpose, and how we communicate the message. All of us here understand that innovation matters a great deal. It's been consistently acknowledged as a fundamental driver of productivity and economic growth. And of course, economic growth is a means to an end. As Thomas Friedman put it, economic growth, meaning a rising standard of living for the clear majority of citizens, more often than not fosters greater opportunity, tolerance of diversity, social mobility, commitment to fairness, and dedication to democracy. That said, it's fair to say that Australia, like many other countries, is facing challenges when it comes to delivering a more productive, dynamic and competitive economy. This is particularly the case when we consider the big shifts underway in the economy and our societies. As you can see from the following charts, sourced from our Productivity Commission as well as our Bureau of Statistics, we have a productivity challenge in Australia. Average labour productivity growth in the decade 2010 to 2020 was the slowest in 60 years, with an annual average of just 1.1%, well below the long-run average of 1.8%. Similarly, Australia, like many countries, is contending with levels of investment that are lower today than has been the case in the past. Knowledge-intensive investment, let's call it capital with brains, has generally fallen compared with GDP. We've measured knowledge-intensive investment as that investment comprising research and development, software, exploration, and investment in machinery and equipment. Now, as most economists will tell you, business investment is a critical component of economic growth. Investing in new productive capacity boosts labour productivity, thereby raising wages and incomes. But really importantly, and again this gets to the heart of what we're discussing, investment doesn't just add greater capacity for producing goods and services. In its own right, it's an important transmission mechanism for knowledge. Which brings us to the essence of this conference. Intellectual property arrangements form an essential part of a broader innovation system. IP rights exist to ensure that creators and inventors are rewarded for their efforts. But the level and duration of that protection must not be so great as to impede the benefits to consumers and other producers from the adoption and dissemination of ideas. It's interesting to go back 15 years to the seminal paper from the Nobel Prize winner Joseph Stiglitz, who at the time noted, globalisation is one of the most important issues of the day, and intellectual property is one of the most important aspects of globalisation, especially as the world moves toward a knowledge economy. How we regulate and manage the production of knowledge and the right of access to knowledge is at the centre of how well this new economy, the knowledge economy, works and who benefits. Now, he did go on to say that, like most academics, he had ambivalent feelings about intellectual property, coming to the conclusion that being ignored is far worse than having one's property stolen. Now, we were fortunate to host Professor Stiglitz at the ACCC office in Sydney last year, and you can see a photo of him with our chair, Gina Cass-Gottlieb. Look, the ACCC has long recognised the important role that intellectual property plays in most aspects of economic activity. In particular, we've appreciated that the creation of exclusive IP rights can address the problem of market failure and the free riding problem. The approach that Australia has taken in assessing IP systems and whether they meet the goal of balancing the incentives for the creation of IP without unreasonably impeding incentives for the efficient use of IP is to take a principles-based approach. The 4 principles that can be applied to the IP framework to achieve this goal are whether the system is effective, efficient, adaptable and accountable. The ACCC has supported this approach, which was actually formulated by our Productivity Commission, although rather than ensuring that the IP system does not unreasonably impede further competition, the ACCC thinks the IP system should actively promote and harness competition to provide appropriate incentives for innovation and investment. Moreover, the ACCC view is that the role of competition particularly relates to the principles of ensuring that the IP system is effective and efficient. Competitive forces apply a discipline to market participants to ensure that IP is created and used at the lowest cost, and the returns are proportional to the risk and value of the IP. Now, the ACCC has for many years held to the view that IP and competition law are for the most part complementary, both being directed toward encouraging innovation and dynamism in the economy. IP rights confer on the owners the right to exploit their IP and to exclude others from using it. The extent to which it creates market power depends on the availability of substitute products, many of them which may themselves be subject of IP rights and other features of the market. The mere granting of an IP right does not conflict with our Competition and Consumer Act. Similarly, the exercise of various rights conferred by IP laws will not generally conflict with the competition laws. This is because the licensing or assignment of IP is often pro-competitive, as it enables IP to be exploited to a greater extent than would occur if the rights were not licensed or assigned at all with competition laws. In some circumstances, the extent and use of those rights may give rise to competition concerns and be detrimental to efficiency and welfare. Market behaviour that inhibits the dissemination of IP would include both coordinated behaviour by two or more firms in restrictive licensing practices and unilateral behaviour by single firms with market power restricting the supply of IP rights. For example, if IP owners limit competition and extend market power through agreements with rivals, aggregating substitutable rights through acquisitions, or through practices designed to exclude rivals and leverage market power unrelated to the creation of products, then efficiency and consumer welfare may be harmed. Also, certain licensing terms and conditions may have anti-competitive purpose or effect. For example, collective or cross-licensing arrangements which restrict competition between licence holders may enable the exercise of market power in the setting of licence fees or non-price licensing conditions. I won't delve into it now, but we're also conscious of the ways in which patents can be used for strategic purpose, some of which may be harmful to competition and innovation. I think as others have discussed earlier today and yesterday, this includes pay for delay, patent settlements, evergreening, product hopping, patent flooding, and ambushing tactics when it comes to standard setting organisations. Just want to touch on a recent significant development in Australia relating to the interaction between IP rights and competition. And that was the repeal of Section 51(3) of the Competition and Consumer Act. Previously, this section provided an exemption from certain provisions of the Act for conditional licensing or assignment of intellectual property rights. This section was repealed in 2018, recognising, as I mentioned earlier, that IP rights and competition are no longer thought to be in fundamental conflict. The ACCC considered that commercial transactions involving IP rights, including the assignment and licensing of such rights, should be subject to the competition laws in the same manner as transactions involving other property and assets. I'd just like to return to the point about competitive forces being optimised where the appropriate balance is struck in the IP system between incentives to create and incentives to use IP. At the ACCC, we recognise it's difficult to precisely define this balance, although it's not clear that Australia's IP system is in fact striking the right balance. In fact, the extent of IP protections may in some instances go beyond what's needed to resolve the free rider problems and incentivise innovation. Many patents are filed and not exploited at all, or filed speculatively to extract licence fees from firms who subsequently market a similar technology. Where thresholds for filing patents are low, there may be an excess of patents with little prospect of being developed into products that are brought to market. This imposes inefficient costs on the administration of the system. We further note that if patent protections extend too broadly, and if there are inadequate revenues to access patents on reasonable terms and conditions, then this has the potential to seriously undermine sequential innovation and thus reduce dynamic efficiency. The ambition must be for patent protection that facilitates greater sharing of knowledge. And this may include more flexible patent rights, incentives to expedite patented technologies to be brought to market, and higher thresholds for registering patents. Look, just before concluding, I'd like to make a few remarks at a more general level again building on some of the comments that have been made. Some of you may know the ACCC has been undertaking a major multi-year inquiry into the supply of digital platform services in Australia, and our 7th report in this series was released earlier this week. It had a focus on the expanding ecosystems of the major digital platforms. Unsurprisingly, the platforms argue that they are significant drivers of innovation and that their high levels of investment enable them to create new and innovative products and services that interconnect with their ecosystems to the benefit of consumers. They also point to the fact that their digital platform ecosystems also encourage innovation from other sectors, such as advancements in streaming, connectivity, and operating system technologies, for example, which led to the development of smart TVs from Sony, LG, Samsung, among others. But a key strategy used by digital platforms to expand their product offerings is through internal research and development. And our report cited some quite remarkable numbers in this regard. The 5 big tech companies spent an estimated $190 billion on research and development in the year to September 2022, including as much as $70 billion by Amazon, according to certain filings it's made. By way of contrast, the Bureau of Statistics estimated that across all businesses in Australia, research and development spending totalled just over $13 billion in US dollar terms. Our report notes that when expanding and innovating, a digital platform service may nonetheless inhibit consumers' access to the innovative products of rivals by inhibiting interconnections outside their ecosystems. To be sure, digital platform providers have strong incentives to stimulate complementary innovation, but also to prevent complements from developing into substitutes for the platform's own core services. Our report also highlighted how the other common way for digital platforms to expand their range of products and services is through corporate acquisitions. The ACCC estimate is that since the late 1980s, Apple, Amazon, Google and Meta have collectively acquired over 850 companies. It's also allowed them to obtain certain assets, such as particular technologies, functionalities, intellectual property or talent. One study that we quoted found that these platforms use acquisitions mostly to integrate the assets of the acquired firm into their ecosystem and strengthen their core market segments, rather than to expand in new markets. Just finally on AI, clearly this is something that's going to consume a lot of time of governments and regulators in the coming months and years. And we had a very nice flavour of this, I think, at yesterday's session. Our chair, Gina Cass-Gottlieb, recently chaired an international competition network panel on competition and consumer issues in generative AI. It's fair to say there was strong support across agencies for a whole-of-government approach to AI regulation, and recognising that effective regulation of AI requires competition issues to be addressed. We are seeing concerns that bottlenecks may be forming in the AI stack, with significant economies of scale observed in 2 key inputs, data and computer power, and the risks that the large digital platforms could potentially use their data and compute advantages to entrench their market position through anti-competitive tying and bundling. While the downstream deployment of AI capabilities is still evolving, at this stage there are concerns that startups and new entrants will only be able to compete at the margins and perhaps be unable to challenge the big platforms. But this and more, I suspect, will be a topic for many meetings to come. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm glad you highlighted how some perceived threats, such as AI, may actually be turned into an opportunity by the regulators. Now, finally, last but not the least, we will take a deeper dive into the processes and criteria used by competition authorities. And to tell us about the approach of the Japan Fair Trade Commission, let's hear from Mr. Toshiro Kashiyama.
Okay, thank you for introducing me. I am very happy and honored to be able to participate in this session and this conference. In my presentation, I will mainly talk about the innovation competition, a theoretical mechanism which measures affect innovation competition, and practical ways of investigating the impact of the merger on innovation competition. First, I would like to introduce the market condition of M&A in Japan. The number of M&A deals by Japanese companies are around 4,000 cases per year, and M&A division in JFTC investigates around 300 cases per year. And the companies conduct M&A for several reasons, such as tax benefits and increased market share, and a diversification of risk, and technology transfer. I feel that M&A for technology transfer accounts for around 30% of the total merger cases we investigate. And this type of merger is particularly common in the fields of pharmaceutical, biotechnology, and precision machinery industries. And in these fields, M&A for technology transfer accounts for around 80 to 90%. This number is very different from other fields. And as to the investigation of the merger, basically there is no special consideration for M&A for technology transfer. But now, recently, the evolving digital economy and the proliferation of platform and ecosystem-based businesses can reduce the dynamism of competition. So now, ensuring a market condition that can promote innovation becomes very important in competition policy and antitrust law. And first, I would like to introduce merger guidelines in Japan. These guidelines show the perspective to assess the impact of horizontal merger on research and development activities. And this guideline says generally that when both parties are engaged in R&D relating to competing goods or services, JFTC evaluates the impact of the relevant merger on competition, considering specific and actual circumstances of such R&D activities. And this merger guideline also provides an example. For instance, when a product supplied by one of the parties is highly competitive with a product regarding which the other party is engaged in R&D, the merger will greatly affect competition, because the merger will cause the competition of the parties to decrease, and the merger is deemed likely to cause other party to be less willingly to be dedicated to R&D. So, usually we investigate merger related to innovation competition by focusing on the degree of competition of the parties' products. And next, I will introduce recent topics of the JFTC. In this March, JFTC opened the study group on innovation and the competition policy. This study group aims to theoretically and systematically explore the mechanisms merger affect R&D incentives based on the economics and relevant disciplines. And this study group published an interim report in this June. And it highlights that R&D incentives for innovation stems from the difference between expected profits when R&D is conducted and R&D is not conducted. And this report identifies also how merger impact various factors, mainly 4 factors, and eventually affects R&D incentives. First factor is appropriability, and This means the degree at which competitors are prohibited from copying successful innovation, or innovations can be monetized through licensing. This is a trade-off of a spillover. And the second element is necessary inputs and the capability for R&D. This means whether combination of assets generates supplementarity and contributes to cost reduction, resource allocation optimization, and R&D investment capacity. And in most cases, especially horizontal merger, will have a good impact on these elements because it expands the party's scale and business portfolio. And the third is profit structure and conditions of the products and services. This means profit margin, costs, the product of scale, and the business portfolio. This element changes the expected profits for R&D. And the last element is market condition for products and services. This is related to market concentration and product differentiation and switching costs. For example, where the market share of the parties is relatively high or dominant, R&D incentives are likely to decrease because a new product to be launched, the other party developed, would be likely to substitute for the sales of the party's own existing products. And also, where the product has been differentiated, the merger would not have an impact on R&D incentives because the merged companies would not steal customers from either of the party's products or their competitors' products. Okay, and next, I would like to talk about the practical way of investigating the impact of the merger on innovation competition. Of course, the product and the R&D are not sold in the market, so we cannot assess the impact based on the market share. So we think it is very important to understand exactly how the parties intend to use the technology and human resources and the purpose of the merger. So to understand these things, I think there are many two ways of investigating. Of course, one way is interview with third parties. We usually implement some interviews to the key employees of the parties regarding on R&D activities and key employees of parties' competitors. This is one way, and another way is gathering and assessing internal documents. So I focus on this presentation internal documents. With regard to the scope, of course, the scope will be determined by case basis, but usually we often request documents dating back around 2 years prior to the request. And we may request documents created before the M&A consideration stage. And what kind of documents are we gathered? This answer is 4 types of internal documents. First type of internal document is board meeting records of the merging parties. And the second type is internal discussion documents analyzing the purpose and potential effects of the merger. The third type is emails of board members or key employees involved in the merger consideration. And 4 is reports on pricing, quantity, and marketing, including market studies related to the merger. We gather and assess internal documents in this year 15 cases. It is 5% of the total merger cases we investigate this year. And I'm introducing some examples specific example of our investigation related to innovation competition. First example is a merger of Lam Research Corporation and the KLA Tenka Corporation. This is a vertical merger, and one of the parties are engaged in R&D activities with other parties' competitors. And we concluded that the parties would gain an unfair advantage in the product sales market by one of the parties shares classified information concerning R&D activities of the other party's competitors with the other party, and the party uses it in product development. Also, this concern would reduce the willingness of other parties to engage in joint R&D activities with the parties. And the second example is a transfer of business from GlaxoSmithKline KK to Novartis International AG. We concluded that the products of both parties were under development, and it is reasonable to think the deal could eliminate the potential competition. But this deal would not, we conclude that this deal would not raise the competitive concerns because 4 other competitors were engaged in related R&D, and that they presented their competitive pressure. And of course, I cannot say the name of the parties because it is not made public, but there are some other cases regarding such as a killer acquisition and merger cases in which ecosystem theory of harm is applied. And our team is now investigating one of these cases, and maybe we'll make a decision and make it public next January or February. So please looking forward to it. But now we face some issues and challenges of investigating the impact of the merger on innovation competition. First is related to the duration of forward-looking assessment. Under the merger review, we usually investigate in the merger cases assuming the market condition in the near future, such as 2 years. This is prescribed in our merger guideline in Japan. But to assess the impact on the future innovation competition more precisely and accurately, I think and I feel we have to assume the market conditions more further future, such as 5 or even 7 years. This is one issue. And the next issue is especially the horizontal merger, is the difficulty of the possible behavioral remedies. The possible behavioral remedies of this type of M&A about restricting the money and the human resource for R&D. But this type of remedies is not suitable and inappropriate because restricting those fields means the restriction of the freedom of capital market and labor market. So, because first, one of the reasons is nationality of Japan, but another reason is related to the next issues. And the third issue is a burden of proof of the JFTC. In Japan, it is said the competition authorities would bear the burden of proof on the probability that the proposed transaction would lead to substantial reduction in competition. But it is very difficult to prove the certainty of competitive concerns in the future, especially this type of M&A regarding innovation competition is very uncertain. So finally, to address these issues, I think our team thinks, it's not JFTC's sole opinion, but our team think we have to consider the amendment of the merger guideline in the near future to keep up with the market changes of market trend. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Toshiro, for giving us a detailed look at what you do in the JFTC. We have a few minutes, and 5 minutes to be exact, and I'm not sure if there are questions on Slido. Are there? If there are none, may I just ask a follow-up question to Toshiro? Because you mentioned that you ask for internal documents that go back even 2 years prior to the filing of the requests, or those that were prior even to the consideration of the M&A. What would be the consequences or penalties if the request is not complied with?
Okay. Most cases, mostly there are no legal sanctions with non-compliance with our request to submit the internal documents. Because understanding, we have never had the case which parties did not voluntarily submit the documents. So mostly to every cases, the margin parties voluntarily submit the documents. But of course, theoretically and legally, we can make an order to submit the documents to us. But it is if the margin parties violate our orders, but it is a very small legal sanction, so I doubt it operates that sanction. So we rely on the parties voluntarily to submit the documents.
Thank you very much. Slido is alive. The first question is very significant. Ideally, R&D spending should be 2 to 5% of GDP in developing countries. In the Philippines, it's at 0.16%. How can this be improved through tech transfer? Perhaps Peter would like to take the question.
Thank you, Patricia. Look, really good question. Not sure whether I have the answer, but it's interesting, who should do the R&D? Is it the private sector or is it the government sector? As I think Joe Stiglitz says, it's the government and universities who tend to do more R&D, whereas someone like Matt Ridley would say it's really about the private sector doing it. I think the other thing which is interesting in this is in terms of your investment flows, but also I think in Australia's case, something like 90% of the patents in Australia are foreign owned as well. So I'm not sure whether I've got an answer to that, but it's a difficult question. But I think, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, that if you're serious about growth and about boosting living standards, you really do need to have this addressed.
Thank you, Peter. Would anybody else in the panel like to chime in?
I think maybe one of the ways that we've looked at this issue is it's multi-sectoral. It's not really dependent on just one particular agency pushing for greater innovation. We've seen combined efforts where, for example, the Ministry for Trade and Industry will also then look for certain champions in a new sector. And then it often starts off with some degree of public funding, but usually with hard targets. And I think some degree of subsidies that are given do help to spur a greater amount of innovation. So the way we look at it, I think it's not just a question of competition law or that the IP framework needs to support registration of patents, but it's also about trying to spur the economic players within the market to try and move towards more innovation. Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Tejero, you're on the side of the innovators.
That's right.
What would you do?
Thank you. On the micro level, from the researcher's point of view, in the Philippines especially, the call for proposals for researches would be placed at designated times of the year. And sometimes the researchers would need those resources at any given point of time, right? So there's a difficulty in chiming with the deadlines that are placed, not so frequently during the year. That's one. And also the amount that they would need is much more than what is given. So in the end, I can speak for the many researchers in my university, much of the funding comes from out of pocket. So which is, you have a limitation, a big limitation with out of pocket funding. Just like in healthcare in this country, it's out of pocket. And so it's also very challenged. So there, as we have heard, it's multi-sectoral. So I know the government is doing all the possibilities. We get much of the funding from the Department of Science and Technology and also from DOH, but there are also some limitations there, but would like to engage the private sector. We've been trying to do some collaborative research with them, not only in the Philippines, but we're also looking at possibly abroad, and we have done a number, and that's also another possibility. So we continue to explore other possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'd love to discuss this more, but we've come to the end of our time. So thank you very much to our panelists, and I hope that the points they have raised and what you have heard in the previous sessions will give rise to more fruitful discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our moderator, Attorney Bunye. And here's to hoping we'll reach the 2 to 5% that R&D deserves and not just stuck at 0.16. Let's hopefully at least get 1.5 in. All right. Thank you very, very much for that. Attorney Bunye, Director Tejero, Mr. Look, Commissioner Crone, and Mr. Kashiyama. At this point, to all of my delegates, participants of the 10th ACC, we are going to flash 2 QR codes on screen. Can we start with the first QR code? That's the evaluation form for today. But for those of you, because apparently we didn't get enough evaluation forms yesterday, this is the evaluation form for day 1. So there are 2 that we would like you to scan. This is, okay, now it says day 2. Day 2 first, that's for the last 2 sessions, session 4 and 5, when we tackled biotechnology. And now, just our last session, wrapping up. Thank you very, very much. Shall we flash again the QR code for day 1, please? For those of you who weren't able to submit your evaluation forms yesterday, this is for day 1. Please do take a moment to scan both. Now, for the final part of our conference, it is time to officially close the 10th ACC. I'd like to invite on stage the PCC Executive Director, Kenneth Tanate. Good morning, Executive Director. Actually, it's good afternoon. We have a late lunch, but it'll be worth it. For now, here's Executive Director Kenneth.
Thank you. Chairman Michael Aguinaldo and PCC commissioners, officials and representatives from competition authorities present today, colleagues in government, or partners from the private sector, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. This year, the Philippine Competition Commission takes pleasure in hosting the 30th ASEAN Experts Group on Competition, or AAGC meeting, and other related meetings on March 13 to 17, held in the island of Palawan, Philippines, followed by the recently concluded 31st AAGC meeting and other related meetings last October 9 to 13 in Mactan, Cebu. And now, this 10th ASEAN Competition Conference here in Manila. After 2 days of collaborative dialogue, exchange, and discussion, the 10th ASEAN Competition Conference has finally come to an end. We have heard a wide range of perspective from representatives of competition authorities and resource persons and panelists from the private sector and government. Building upon the theme from innovation to impact, synergizing antitrust and IP regulation for a stronger ASEAN, the discussions on the interplay between competition policy and intellectual property rights regulation have helped us to understand and recognize that these laws are complementary. as both share a common goal of encouraging and promoting innovation and competition to enhance the welfare of both consumers and businesses. The presentations and insights shared during the sessions provided a broader perspective on the relationship between competition policy and IP rights. Say, for instance, the pharma markets, digital markets, biotechnology, technology transfer, among others. It emphasizes the need for effective antitrust and IP regulations that work together synergistically to create an environment conducive to innovation and its subsequent impact. And we have learned that IP rights need to incentivize innovation and creativity, allowing creators and inventors to reap the rewards of their efforts. At the same time, competition policy aims to foster fair and open markets, promoting consumer welfare and preventing anti-competitive practices. However, finding the right balance between competition policy and IP rights is a challenge for all of us. It requires careful consideration of various factors, including the need to protect IP rights while ensuring that competition is not unduly restricted. Truly, collaboration among policymakers, regulators, industry players, and legal experts is essential to ensure a fair and balanced approach. By fostering innovation, encouraging competition, and protecting IP rights, we can create an environment that is beneficial to both consumers and creators. Moreover, this conference also highlights the importance of cooperation and collaboration among ASEAN member states in aligning their antitrust and IP regulations. We're hoping that after this conference, the discussion on this topic will continue even more through the sharing of best practices and experiences. In closing, I would like to thank the heads and officials of competition authorities from ASEAN member states, the ASEAN Secretariat, our resource persons, panelists, moderators, representatives from foreign competition authorities and international organizations, and the private sector. This 10th ASEAN Competition Conference would not have been possible without your invaluable support and active participation. We are looking forward to capitalizing the relationship we have developed to work together towards creating a more robust, more innovative, and more inclusive ASEAN economic community. Thank you, maraming salamat po at mabuhay tayong lahat.
PCCED, Kenneth Tanata, ladies and gentlemen, closing the 10th ACC. Thank you very, very much for that. And please, we do value your evaluation, your feedback, so please make sure you submit your evaluation forms, not just for day 2, but for day 1 as well. Lunch is served. Please do indulge in lunch, and we will see you not next year, next year. It takes 2 years for the next ACC. That'll be the 11th. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Isa Leton. Please enjoy the rest of your day. To all AEGC members, all AE